Okay, so I'll start by saying that I don't believe I'm either an expert in artificial intelligence, nor especially in healthcare. So you may wonder what I'm doing up here. But I believe that for those of you in the audience who are perhaps also not experts in these areas, I'm happy to be your representative on stage. And so in that spirit, I'd like to start by asking what I think is perhaps the obvious question. We know that artificial intelligence means different things to different people. We hear about machine learning, big data, digital transformation, marketing automation, robots. But when we're talking about AI in healthcare communications, what exactly are we talking about? So I'd like to start with Romain, if I may, please, first. I'll come to the other two after, because you actually have AI in your job title, which I think is quite impressive.
So maybe you don't know this, but maybe I am an AI.
Okay, that wasn't in the in my briefing notes. But
no, it is a great question. I think it's a question that every company needs to ask themselves. Like, how do we define AI? It is, on one end, it might be seen as a buzzword. On the other end, there is actual use and value to AI in general. The way I would define it, maybe in engineering terms, but it's really applying statistical models, probabilities to big data to get insights. And so those can then help communication professionals make better decisions. So I really see it as a augmented intelligence more so than artificial intelligence. So it can augment the way we make decisions, where we spend our time, get quicker insights.
Okay, so better information, I suppose. I will come to you next, Brandon, if you don't mind. How do you see it at UCB?
Yeah, so I am not in artificial intelligence. Hopefully I express some intelligence up here. But at UCB, we look at it in a couple of different ways. So we break it down into when we look at the application of artificial intelligence and technology to healthcare, we refer to it as digital care transformation or digital business transformation. And by digital care transformation, what we mean is the actual application or a resource or tool that interfaces with a patient or a physician based on the analytical models or the data that has been evaluated to help with either getting them the right information or helping them with that decision that they may be making, or helping them to explain a diagnosis, as an example. On the digital business transformation side, we use the data that we have available to help make our own teams more effective. So whether that is our sales team that we have within the US that is better, more optimized in terms of how they approach a different customer, or what channel we might use to reach a patient or a physician. So we use artificial intelligence in both of those applications in order to just more effectively get the right information to the right person at the right time.
Okay. And Emily, how do you see it from an integrated comms perspective? Do you see it at all differently?
Yeah, I think I see it in many ways similarly, right? It's a tool that helps us better understand where our audiences go, particularly patients and physicians, better understand how and where we can intersect them with communications, as well as play a little bit, right? I mean, one way that we think about using AI in communications is potentially, crisis simulations. So especially in healthcare, it's so important for communicators to be able to look into the future and see what's coming. And for me, and I think for our team, AI is one of the next steps to having technology help us look around the corner.
Okay, so we now have, I think, a reasonable picture of what we're talking about when we talk about artificial intelligence in healthcare. Let's try and get a bit more detail, perhaps, in terms of how exactly it is being used currently. where are the opportunities that all of you are seeing? And what are the kinds of applications that you can talk about? You know, the more examples I feel we can get, the better to get a you know, a clearer understanding of perhaps how it's actually improving all the different areas you all talked about, but I suppose ultimately how it's improving patient care. So, Brandon, if I could start with you this time, please.
Yeah, so I'll start with the digital care transformation piece. So that's actually getting to the clinical pathway and intersecting with how a physician is interfacing with a patient or talking with a patient. So one of the examples that we have worked with is looking at when we look at diseases, there are a number of diseases where patients walk around with the disease and it takes years to get to that diagnosis. An example that we've worked on recently is in osteoporosis. People can walk around for years with small fractures in their spine that they think are just either stiffness in their back or pain that's caused from some other ailment until they maybe fall and break another bone or fall and, worst of all, break a hip. And in reality, many of these patients have had a CT scan of that contains their spine, and and you can actually see that fracture in there. But those CTs are generally for other reasons, whether it's COVID-19 diagnosis or other ailments of the respiratory system. And the radiologist may not be looking for that. We had developed an algorithm to help identify those fractures, point them out to the radiologist, make the radiologist aware, so that can then be communicated by the radiologist to the treating physician and ultimately make that patient aware of what they're walking around with, so they can formulate a treatment plan, whether that be diet, exercise, nutrition, or pharmaceutical treatment. But that's just one example, and we, as a pharmaceutical company, we partner with a number of other companies to bring this to use, and that's one that we worked on last year.
That sounds really interesting. It's a high bar there, Romain, in terms of applications that you're seeing, perhaps. What excites you in terms of how AI is being used?
What excites me? I think it's the combination of multiple bits and pieces that are grouped together. I think we think of AI too often as this one big black box, this one thing. But really it's a tool, as Emily was saying, within many tools that can be combined together to help patients, help identify physicians. So no, at IPM.ai, we actually work with some of UCB's portfolio companies in identifying misdiagnosed or undiagnosed patients. So we help identify them. But it doesn't stop there. That's just kind of the first piece of the puzzle. So AI can tell us the chances of someone getting diagnosed in the future. But then we can find their HCPs, and we can find key opinion leaders maybe in the clinical trial space or in other spaces where these folks can help reach those patients. And then we can take that to another level with things, actually, luckily I work also with another startup, Conversation Health, in the AI space. And so they have a virtual rep. And that virtual rep can connect with the HCPs, with the doctors, to have digital AI conversations that will then enhance the conversation between the HCP and perhaps the pharma company and to learn more. And so that can then circle back to that patient finding. So multiple bits of AI and technology, not just AI, but technology in general, can really lead to massive upside for the patient. And I think that patient-centric perspective is what excites me.
Just staying with you briefly, if you don't mind, you mentioned at the outset the use of artificial intelligence to derive better insights from data as the kind of key application. Any specific examples with respect to that you're currently seeing?
Yeah, maybe I'll go back to that. Key opinion leaders, KOLs, right? I think people know in the communication space as well as in the healthcare space. So we work in the healthcare space, but it's really interesting to me because a KOL today may not be a KOL in 6 months. As your drug is in the healthcare space, as your drug is going through the life cycle, your KOL change. right? So you have different KOLs when you're in clinical trials. People that have participated in clinical trials, people that have influence, people maybe that publish a lot, are more influential as KOLs. Whereas post-launch and commercialization, other doctors or other researchers may become bigger KOLs. So it's providing that insight and the comparison and following the journey and getting those insights through AI really rapidly, right? Because we could find out with a lot of people, but it's getting these quick insights as things change constantly.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's a really good example, a very good way to kind of help picture this in practical terms. Emily, how are you? What are the examples perhaps that you might be able to provide in terms of how this is changing your own communications work?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of different ways, and they circle around some of the themes that Brandon and Romain both mentioned, which was finding patients, right, and connecting patients. In particular, in healthcare, we often get called in on clinical trial recruitment as communicators. Anyone remember old school local media tours? Well, we have much better tools now to help find patients, to help find appropriate patients to bring into clinical trials. And I think what's even more exciting than that is to be able to use AI to help us better identify a more diverse patient population for the clinical trials. I mean, that is a huge issue in healthcare. That is a huge issue in clinical development. And being able to have the tools to help us better find, better identify the patients, the physicians, and then also help make those connections. I think in the earlier session today, there was discussion about people of color having, particularly Black and African American people, not participating as much in clinical trials for historical reasons. Another major reason why they do not is because physicians don't ask them if they would like to participate. So even being able to know which physicians are more likely to be the doctors that might be bringing these patients into trials is a hugely important place for us to intersect and try to actually change healthcare outcomes.
Yeah, that's a pretty crucial point. We'll come to that in a moment as well when we talk about some of the challenges posed by some of these techniques that we're talking about. Before we get to that, though, I wanted to ask, is there enough of this happening? Do you feel as if adoption of these techniques is happening quickly enough? Or are there challenges, obstacles, barriers that are slowing it down? And is that a problem? Brandon, if I can start with you.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is no, it's not happening quickly enough. I think there are definitely, there's a lot of opportunity for us to improve care through the technology that we're developing. I think we're working very diligently through some of those challenges that you mentioned. Just to name a few, availability of the data. These analytics and artificial intelligence run on a base of data, and then they need to be tested on another base of data. And there's a lot that goes into that. And so finding that data and connecting in with data as it is being developed is not the easiest thing to do. You know, in theory, it sounds great and it works really well. And you know, there's some other industries where you're not dealing with patient data and where there's a bit more flexibility. I think that leads to the second challenge, which we're in a regulated industry, and rightly so. We have to keep the patient at the center of what we do, and we have to ensure that their safety is the number one goal. And then the final thing I'll mention is just related to that is the data privacy. So how you can use the data, how we have had data sets that we've used in ways in the past where it would be a great application for a new analysis, but we don't have the necessary authority or approval in place to do that. So we have to work through that. We're getting smarter at how we acquire data, how we actually and how we do data. Maybe just one example. We're starting to partner with other patient advocacy groups and other groups on collection of data. and collecting data in a new native form so that we do have the ability to do the analysis. And that analysis can be done both by UCB and by other companies that will work with those advocacy groups for diseases like psoriasis, which have historically been diseases that are hard for a patient to necessarily describe, different flare-ups. If they have a way to record the joints, the different areas of skin that where they're seeing impact, it allows better treatment options to be discussed and found.
You mentioned a couple of the big challenges, so thank you for that. And I think we will discuss those in a bit more detail shortly. Emily, is adoption being held back? Is that a problem?
It certainly is. I think especially in healthcare, we're sort of dipping our toes into it, and especially global healthcare. I mean, just the country regulations, as Brandon mentioned, I mean, making sure that we're being compliant, protecting data and appropriately. For us as an organization, I mean, we've only really focused on AI for the last 18 months or so. And so we're working very hard to pull it into our organization and actually to make it something that actually all of us as communicators have access to. We just launched a real chemistry insight system so that we can get high-level insights through our AI brought right to us as communicators in our own, desk space. So giving us more control so that when we actually go to the experts on our team, we have a better sense of where to go, where to get the information, but we're still learning. I think this is a bit futuristic in some ways, and I think as communicators, some of the other places that we haven't seen adoption is, AI-generated press release writing. The tools are out there. We're not doing a lot of that, I think, most of us as professionals. But, there are other ways that I think AI will inform and transform communications in the future.
So, Romain, we've had two responses here, two people both saying that adoption is too slow. Do you agree?
So I'm a bit conflicted. As you said, I have the AI title in my AI word in my title, but on one end, I agree. I mean, 30% of all data in the world comes from healthcare, and it's probably underutilized. I think I agree with that totally. On the other hand, there should be regulation. And there are ways to learn and improve. And so what real chemistry and I think IPM, the way we look at it is really empowering people with AI, but not necessarily having AI make the decisions. And I think that's key in where we are as a society more broadly. I don't think we can take the risk of blindly trusting an AI and fully adopting it. So do we need more of it? Yes, but with people. And when I look in the room and I hear previous talks, I think communication is a huge piece of it. Like, how do we explain AI? So can we come into, how can we use, we need better explainable AI as well. It shouldn't be just a black box. And I'm not for pushing a black box into every business and everywhere. So I think, more explainable AI, better use of data in general, certainly, but with caution, I think.
It's interesting because you mentioned one of the challenges is actually the understanding of artificial intelligence, how it itself is communicated. And that is both presumably external and internal. Yeah. Brandon, how much of an internal comms challenge has it been?
Yeah, so we use some of the same technology that Romain talked about in terms of patient finding, and that links into physicians that will see these patients. And we're working with our communications people and our salespeople to explain to them how we came to the conclusion that Dr. A may be a better person for them to see than Dr. B, who they have a relationship with or have known for years. And providing them some of that background, but that basic understanding of what it is we're trying to accomplish. I think communication is so key. And being able to also establish the investment that is required to continue to develop these things. I think Corley talked about thinking long term, and that is so important for us as well. Typically, as an industry, we've thought long term in terms of clinical trials, but we also need to think long term in terms of the investment in AI and other technologies, and to get that thinking, to think about things that we're going to invest in and learn from over the next decade. It takes a certain level of understanding at the executive level, as I'm sure you can understand.
I mean, I think it's an issue for technology in general, I would imagine, but in the healthcare sector, which is so high touch and has such huge consequences, perhaps even bigger. Emily, do you feel there is a communications challenge here? I both read and watched Bad Blood, and it kind of raised a lot of questions around technology in healthcare, which perhaps haven't been satisfactorily answered yet.
I think for sure. Was it an earlier discussion about AI and robots taking jobs in healthcare? It is so critical that human expertise is applied to anything that comes from AI, be it from looking at charts. These are all flags, but we do have to really continue to have that human lens on anything that comes out.
If I can add one thing, the example that I had before about identifying the vertebral fractures, some of our internal discussion we were swirling on. We have to work with radiologists in order to test this, but won't they feel like we're taking their jobs away? One of the most interesting things was that I would say, with very few exceptions, most of the hospitals we went into and most of the radiology groups we spoke with were excited about the opportunity to have more and better information to treat patients. And because we also saw that the radiologist was essential to the transmission and communication of the insight to the right physicians. And so it was an interesting finding. It was, I think, eye-opening for a lot of us internally.
Yeah, and so for us, I think really helping our clients, our stakeholders understand what AI is doing. I don't know that AI in and of the technology, I don't know that, there's a little bit of a black box, but I think that's okay. I think as long as the AI is trusted, reproducible, I think it's another tool for us.
No, I agree, and I think AI, kind of what you're getting at, AI needs the experts just as much as the experts need AI. And in radiology, for example, well, someone's got to tell the AI at some point before it's even a model, this is a fracture, this is not a fracture. Yeah. This is a good press release, and this is a really bad press release. You need to teach them the good and the bad. And so that takes humans. And so AI needs that. It needs to be trained. I mean, the technical term is training a model, and training is that. It's good examples and bad examples. Like, this is a funny joke, this is not a funny joke, this is a good title, this is not a good title. So AI can enhance people, but it also needs experts to provide that expertise during the whole building process.
If I could stay with you, because the point you raise is an interesting one. You can't divorce these conversations, as you've just put it, from the need to teach, and then that also brings into question who's doing the teaching, and we've seen with AI that it can raise significant concerns about representation, about diversity and inclusion, about who's being represented in terms of the decisions that are being made. I mean, how big a challenge do you see that as being, and do you feel it is being addressed?
I think it is being addressed. I think it's a challenge. It's a very hard one. I think there is biases in our data, and so these models are built on top of data. So people need to spend more time on the data and understand the bias, understand the limitations. I think all over, right? I think that's where I'm getting at. You want to use AI to solve a problem, but you need to really understand the problem. You don't want to just throw AI at the problem. What's the problem? And what are the limitations of AI to solve that problem? Similarly with data, so data is at the backbone of it. You need to understand your data, where it comes from, how it's captured. You need multiple people to look at it, and then you need to understand the limitation of that data. So rightness of limitation is really the key to success, like long-term success of AI, and understandable outputs from an AI.
Brandon, how do you see those challenges? You mentioned before issues around privacy and governance. We've also talked about representation, diversity, and inclusion. And I think maybe underpinning all of this is just a kind of a broader ethical challenge about how much do we want technology in healthcare.
I think part of it comes back to what Romain mentioned, and making sure that what we're working on is not a black box, that we do have transparency, and we do work to educate, even if some of these are complex topics. One of the things that we also uncovered, and Emily talked about diversity in clinical trials. We've looked at both the physicians, but also what makes a patient more likely to enroll in a clinical trial or not. So we looked at the patient experience within the clinical trials, and one of the things that has been fantastic with the advent of technology, we have the Internet of Things. People are all walking around with devices. There's a lot of data on experiences within clinical trials over the last several years, and so we started to tailor our trial design to be more attractive for patients. It's not a new concept, but we're using a lot more data to be able to influence the decisions that we make around trial design, to get more diversity, to get more, and also to get more physicians involved. So, generating and trying to alleviate some of the bias. You're never going to alleviate all of the bias, but to try and get that more diverse data set, that more diverse representation into the work that we're doing.
Emily, how challenging is the data privacy concerns, especially from a global perspective? Because then, as I think we've all alluded to, is you start talking about different regulatory systems in different countries.
It depends on how the data is going to be used. From our perspective as integrated communicators, I think when it comes to, let's say, high-level insight generation, there are workarounds, right? When it comes to actually targeting our communications, that's when it becomes much more challenging. So, we have sort of our portfolio of how we leverage AI and what comes out of it from a privacy perspective in the US. And then we do have, different ways of applying it globally.
Romain, any thoughts from you on the data privacy challenge? I mean, you alluded to it earlier when you said that we do need regulation here.
It's complex. I think it gets even more complex when you look at the global healthcare data. But in the US, it's being solved. I think it's hard to solve, but it's being solved, and a lot of effort goes in there. There are ways to remove, I guess, the identifiable aspects of data. You lose some value, but it's feasible and it's being done. So it is a challenge. It takes time, and the time should be spent there. I think that's the important piece. Time should be spent there. Privacy is very, very important, and it will continue to be.
I think all of you have said that AI won't necessarily replace people. But does it change the kind of skills that perhaps we are looking for when it comes to healthcare communicators? And is that something that is difficult to recruit for, to train for, to identify? Brandon?
Yeah, so I think it does. I mean, and it comes down to communication, and I think it's been mentioned in each of the different panels today. So you have to think about the audience that you're communicating with and what you want them to understand, and make sure that that you're going through the steps of ensuring that there is that understanding. And that goes for whether I'm trying to communicate with my colleagues at our US leadership team or our salespeople, or if we're trying to communicate with a physician. Helping them to understand the information that we're trying to provide is essential. When we get into these more technical, when we introduce more technology into these situations, some of it is transparent, as Emily said, and as Romain talked about. Some of it, they will only know that you're communicating with them via a channel that they happen to be on. But in some cases where you are trying to explain information that can help with a clinical decision or information that can help better understand a disease, if that understanding and making sure that there's a comfort level that it's not a black box, that it's not coming from some unknown data set or from some magical wisdom, is a challenge. And it is hard to find those people that have a knack for that, being able to take technical communications and be able to break it down into something that is understandable and relatable. We have a couple of those people right now, and we're excited about it.
Yeah, and protecting them.
Yes.
No doubt. Emily, is it changing how you're recruiting, how you're training?
It is starting to. I mean, I don't think from a sort of fundamental junior communicator, skill set perspective, we've quite reached the point where they don't need to know how to write. But we do have a lot more tools now via AI that allow them Grammarly, that sort of thing, that help them write. I think we still have an expectation of that. But I think as AI continues to advance, there may be different types of skill sets that we'll be looking for in up and coming communicators. It may be more about how do you leverage technology. That's really a transformation that we at Real Chemistry are in the process of making. It's going to be critical to still understand communications and how to communicate effectively, but we may be thinking about it more in terms of how we're leveraging the tools that are increasingly becoming available to us as communicators, and less about the old days where it was just us sitting there and typing. That will likely evolve.
We have about 5 minutes left, so I want to make sure that if there are any questions from the floor, we've got one at the front here, Mr. Fogg.
Thanks very much. That was really interesting. You talked a lot about I like the idea of seeing AI as a tool rather than sort of fundamental rewiring of the world. How do you anticipate they'll come to market? Do you think it's more likely that you'll see a Publicis sort of Marcel style, let's put everything on black? Or do you think it's going to be much more sort of third-party vendors, which have obviously sort of exploded in number in the last sort of 4 or 5 years?
Wow, yeah. Good question. Who wants to take that one?
Is that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that third-party vendors explode. We have some really, I think, wonderful AI-driven products. There are IPM.ai and Conversation Health platforms, but I think that will only be one piece of what it will look like. That's from my perspective.
I would agree, and we've got experience in working with trying to do things wholesale internally or do things through through our own regulatory pathways. But I think we've seen the most success and we see the most momentum in fit for purpose agencies or companies that are really targeting, as Romain said, a deep understanding of a particular area and really getting the foot in, because it's not easy, and it's in the depth of understanding and the commitment you have to make to that area is really important. So that's where I see, at least as we get started, it's going to be specialists that are focused on different areas to make it come to life.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's a global trend in communications in healthcare, but elsewhere too, where patients expect more at an individual level, just like consumers expect more at an individual level. When you're on your phone, the content, the ads, you expect them to be pointed towards you. And I think business to business will go that direction as well, because it benefits. It benefits from it. It benefits from the specific insights. So, yeah, I agree.
Cool. Any more questions? Okay, so just to close, I'm going to ask you all one final question. So we've only got like 2 or 3 minutes. So, what has got you most excited if you're looking at future uses of AI? Maybe things that perhaps haven't quite come to market yet, but you think may come and may well transform things even further. So, Romain, I'll start with you because I'm sure you've got loads already at your fingertips.
Yeah, I'm trying not to think too far ahead because that gets a bit scary. But I think the text to image, text to video, we're starting to play around in that space. It's the very, very beginning, but it's really going to empower creativity all around. To the earlier question, I think it's going to create new skill sets of people to write the text to get the image you want. So that's something I'm excited about. I think we're just starting there. And I think there's a whole wide world of creative output that's exciting.
Brandon?
You know, I may get a little further out, but or maybe not. You can tell me after. But I think getting better at connecting different pieces of data together to create more of a movie instead of just a series of photos. And I think making sure that we've got that we're starting to get a full view of whether it's a patient or whether it's another type of consumer or a caregiver of how we have the opportunity to impact or improve their lives based on what we understand about their lives today. And you know, right now we can do that on an individual basis, but then we know what will help just that individual person. With the data that is out there and is collectible today, how can we better enhance that life in ways that we haven't been able to do so far.
Okay, and Emily?
I don't know if this is a thing yet, so I'm just, but maybe you can work on it for me. Okay. I think, you know, real world evidence, real world data, and the combination with the AI, I think is a very powerful, sort of combination. What I don't think has really been fully brought to life is how we bring that through in the full value proposition within healthcare. Like, how do we really get into the data to really show the value that we as an industry bring to the world? I think that's, sort of when I think about the healthcare industry communicators in general, I think that's a place where we have a huge opportunity. And I don't know what's really in the data, but I feel like there's something there. And I think that would be a great place for us in the future.
Okay, well maybe we will find out. Can you join me in thanking our wonderful panel, Brandon, Emily, and Romain? A lot of exciting technology, but it seems to me that the fundamental challenges around communications, whether in terms of technology or healthcare in general, remain the same. So, on that note, at least, I think humans are around to stay for a while longer, at least, I hope. So, thank you all.